My name is Mitch Wright. I'm the managing editor of the Nanaimo News Bulletin, and my role here tonight is basically just to introduce everybody, and I sent the one email that brought you all here. So thanks again for coming. This is great to see an almost full house. A couple of housekeeping things. Emergency exits in the event that we do have an emergency, which would be really ironic, is over here and over there. And if there is an emergency, the gathering point is on Gordon Street, which I believe is over there, behind the building. So if you go out that exit, find your way around, and please don't just run off. We want to make sure everyone's okay. Washrooms are also right out here. I didn't write this down, but if you have a cell phone, can you turn it on to vibrate or off? Please. So tonight we've got some great presenters for you, and hopefully you all come away with some really good information about preparedness and empowered to get yourselves prepared if you're not there already. And for me, hopefully if you do come away with some information, you're prepared to share that with everyone, your family, your friends, your neighbor, everyone, your paper boy, and try to get them to get prepared as well. I'm a big advocate for getting prepared. I'm a search and rescue volunteer, and before I became a volunteer, I was not prepared at all. I am now. My search and rescue pack goes with me everywhere. It's in my car right now. I get nervous when I'm away from it. I'm not lying. So there's also one other thing. We are collecting donations at the table out back, and that money that we raise is going to go through the Red Cross to Otsuchi. Is that right? And that village, that brings us to who our first speakers are tonight. They were in that village when the earthquake hit and experienced the tsunami. Marley Daviduck and Carissa Webster are going to be our first speakers. They're going to talk to us about what they experienced, what they saw, and what worked that they saw, what didn't work. After them, we're going to have Alison Bird, who is a seismologist with Natural Resources Canada. She's going to talk to us about what we can actually expect to experience here on Vancouver Island when an earthquake hits, and there's no if there, it's a when. So she's going to let us know what we're going to experience, what we're going to see, what's going to happen afterwards. Which takes us to Ron Lambert, who is our fire chief for Nanaimo Fire Rescue. He's going to talk to us about local government and what their role is in managing an emergency response and how that works. And following that, Karen Lindsay, who is our emergency program manager for the city, is going to talk to us about preparedness, how to get prepared, how easy it is to get prepared. It's really not very difficult, and how to take the steps to get there. And if we have time after that, we're going to have, hopefully we do, a bit of time for Q&A with our presenters. And after that, once we shut down our formal program, I believe they're going to stick around for a few minutes and be ready for, prepared for one-on-one questions if there is time. So, without any further ado, Marley Daviduck and Carissa Webster. Oh, there is one other thing. Some of the presentation on the video, there is some language, so hopefully that doesn't offend you, but you can understand they were in a major disaster. So just a fair warning there that there is a little bit of language.
That was all me, the language. I have a major potty mouth. You can imagine in the situation and seeing this disaster unfold, the kind of stuff that was coming out of my mouth, for those of you that know me, was bad. I'm Marley Daviduck. I've lived in Nanaimo for most of my life, so I know a lot of people here tonight.
And I'm Carissa Webster. I've also grown up in Nanaimo, and I'm really glad to be participating in this tonight. Carissa and I were in Japan. We had just arrived in Japan. We were volunteering with the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, and we were there to document the porpoise slaughter in Otsuchi. And we had arrived the day before. We had tried to get a hotel in Kamaichi, the neighboring town. 3 different hotels denied us because they knew we were with Sea Shepherd and we were there to stop the porpoise slaughter. So we actually had to find a hotel 45 minutes inland. We were in, our intentions were to film the porpoise slaughter in Otsuchi, and Otsuchi was actually 10 kilometers closer to the epicenter than Sendai. We were one of the closest, if not the closest, city to the epicenter, and we were
probably 3 feet from the water in the harbor when the earthquake hit.
So that being said, we felt it was really important that something positive come out of this, so that's why we're participating tonight. We are, like Mitch said, it's not a matter of if, it's when. So we're hoping to bring you guys some awareness, and through our experiences we saw a lot of things that helped, like we made it out for some reason, and some things obviously didn't work for Japan as well. So we'll show you some examples of that through our pictures and video. Mitch also mentioned Otsuchi. So all the funds are going towards the Otsuchi Fund, which is the community that we were in, and it's the hardest hit city. You can donate online as well as at the front door there. And we think it's really important because a lot of the city, I mean, it's pretty much gone, and they need a lot of help to rebuild it. So please do that if you're able to.
Yeah, the Red Cross stated that Otsuchi was the worst hit city in Japan. Out of a population of 17,000 people, they're estimating that at least 12,500 people are dead. So, and we were some of the few people that were able to escape the city. So, like Chris has said, we want to share with you what we did that saved our lives and what saved other people's lives, and things that we saw that probably cost people their lives. And walking away from this, I mean, the number one thing that I feel is to try to help prevent something like that happening in my own community, and to try to encourage people to be prepared and take this kind of thing very seriously. So we're going to go through our pictures and show some video and just explain sort of what happened and what we saw and what it felt like to experience an earthquake like that, and how quick the tsunami came. In the city that we were in, the tsunami came 8 minutes after the earthquake, and we estimated that we missed the initial surge of water by less than 60 seconds. So we barely escaped it. So I think we'll just start with our pictures and just explain what you're seeing. So we arrived in Japan, or we arrived on the east coast of Japan the day before the earthquake happened, and we arrived at around dinner time. And that's when we sort of tried to find a hotel, and nobody would rent to us. And of all the hotels that we tried to get into, the next day all of them were gone. So we're quite thankful that they actually didn't rent a room to us, and we had to go 45 minutes inland to a city called Tono. And we were at the time we were annoyed because we had to drive 45 minutes back and forth. We thought we were going to have to drive 45 minutes back and forth every day. So we got there at about 5 o'clock, and then the next morning, or the next day, we met up with the rest of our crew. There was myself, Carissa, Tara Millen, who's actually from Courtney, she was there as well. Mike Voss, who is from California, Scott West from the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, he's from Seattle, and then a guy from, Brian's from Florida, and he's with Save Japan's Dolphins. So there was 6 of us. And we all met up the next day at about noon in Otsuchi, and we got there about an hour before the earthquake hit, and we were waiting for the harpoon boats to come in. And one boat had come in, a harpoon boat. It didn't have any porpoises on it, and the only reason why we can think that the boat didn't have any porpoises on it is if there's any animal that's going to sort of foresee something like this, it would be a dolphin or a porpoise, because they can sense these kind of things. And so they didn't have any porpoises on the ship, and we were just waiting for the other harpoon boats to come in, and we drove to the other side of the harbor, and we pulled up beside each other, and we had our windows rolled down, and we were just chatting back and forth through the windows about what was going to happen next. And that's when the earthquake hit. And to be a 9.0 earthquake, it was difficult to stand up. It was the cars were hopping around like they were frogs. We were holding onto the cars, and I had never been in an earthquake before, and we didn't really have any idea about a sense of danger. We were kind of laughing at the time, saying, wow, we've never been in an earthquake before. That wasn't in Japan. There had actually been the day before we got there, our friends Tara, Scott, and Brian arrived a day earlier, and there was an earthquake the day before, and I think it was about a 6 or 7.0, and they had a small tsunami, but the tsunami was only about 50 centimeters. I guess anything qualifies as a tsunami, any increase. So they experienced a smaller earthquake and a small tsunami the day before. Okay, here we go. Okay. So I'll let you explain these.
So as Marley said, we were there to document the porpoise slaughter. This is our first footage that we had was the harpoons. So we were there to film and document what was going on there. So this picture here is of a ship that was a harpoon ship. Right behind it there's a dock. That is actually where we were when the earthquake happened. That was probably an hour or so later. So one thing that we really noticed was Japan is very, very prepared for an earthquake and tsunami. Like immediately afterwards, buildings were evacuating, and this is an example of it. Just streams of people were immediately evacuating. Sirens were going off within a matter of seconds. Announcements were being made immediately.
One thing to note is that Otsuchi had a tsunami wall. It was about 6 meters tall, and right after the earthquake happened, volunteer firefighters drove around the tsunami wall, and every so often there was a small space to drive cars through, and they closed a giant steel gate. So immediately they started closing off the tsunami wall, and everybody was evacuating the harbor side of the tsunami wall, and we had to, be very quick to get through it. The tsunami wall was 6 meters high. Unfortunately, the original surge of water was probably double that. So the tsunami wall was pretty much almost entirely washed out to sea as if it was styrofoam. It did not work.
They also had underground tsunami walls, which did reduce the amount of water that went in, but again, those, for the most part, were washed away as well. So this picture here is us. We've made it from the last picture where we were on the dock. We made it up to a hill in a very quick amount of time. Thankfully, Scott West had been in the city for a few days longer than us and had a chance to check places out, and he came across this hill, and we're really, really thankful he had. So this picture is taken from the top of this hill, and like we said, they're very prepared, and one of the first things we noticed from the hill was that ships were immediately leaving the harbor because otherwise they would be ruined. So that was happening within minutes.
Yeah, the ships, they drove them, or they took the ships out to, open ocean to ride it out. So not all of the ships were evacuated, but some of them.
So like we said, I think a lot of people's perception of a tsunami is that it's one large wave that comes and destroys everything. This is actually not the case. We were waiting for a wave as well. And then we turned and looked at the city, and this is an example of it, and the city had already begun to flood. So you can see this beige building here, and it's already half covered in water. It was actually like a 2-story building where the green roof starts there.
It actually happened without us even noticing. We were, like she said, we were waiting for the wave to come, and then we turned around and just said, oh my gosh, the city's underwater. So I think a lot of people expect this giant wave to come right away, and what happened was the water levels rose 50 in some places. It went up to the 5th level in apartment buildings in some places, and it just surged forward. Everything just surged forward, and the water level rose so quickly. And then the water sucked back and exposed the entire seafloor, and then the giant wave came, and then that continued all night into the morning, almost like a pendulum. It just, the water was coming in and going out and coming in and going out, just bulldozing the city over and over and over again. It was still, in the morning, it was still rising, 10, 15 feet and going out again very, very quickly.
So this picture here is an example of, this is just from the first surge of water. There is no wave at this point, and you can already see that there's boats washed up on the shore, buildings already taken down. It's kind of cloudy because it's all the dust from buildings that had been knocked over during the first flood.
This picture is quite well known now. That is a ferry boat on top of an apartment building, and the original surge of water lifted that boat up and left it on top of the apartment building, and that happened. And this was right across from us, and we couldn't believe what we were seeing. We were just in shock.
So after the first flooding, immediately things were being destroyed. This, for example, is a 2-story building that had been, the water started reducing at this point and had carried out many things, including cars, homes, for example, anything you can imagine. It was taking out to sea already, and this is probably only 15 minutes after the earthquake had taken place.
It was pretty horrific to see houses floating around like toys in a bathtub, and cars. And I mean, in this picture, I can see probably half a dozen cars floating near that house, and it was pretty horrific, to say the least.
So after the initial flood, the water reduces dramatically, and this is an example of that. Japan had, or Otsuchi, they had underground tsunami walls, and this originally was a very small island, and now all the surrounding areas are exposed at this point. Again, this is another example of how far the water is reduced. So in the foreground, you can see the large structure, and that is originally underwater. You can't see that typically, but the water had reduced so much at this point that it's all open and able to see. And again, I can't say enough about how well prepared they were, but even though they were so well prepared, all of these broken bits of cement, that was a part of a tsunami wall, and it had broken just from the first surge of water. This is what the island looked like originally. It had a home and a lighthouse on it, and that was washed away within the first surge of water. The sign you can see in the background here, that is the tsunami safe zone. So they were fairly accurate in their estimate of how high the tsunami would go. And you can see along the edge the water line. So that's us going into the city to see if we could find a route out, to see if we were able to drive or walk, or what our possibilities were.
The sign says tsunami inundation zone, or tsunami inundation area. It's just another example of them being prepared. But I don't think that anybody could ever prepare for something like this. I don't know how they would possibly prepare for something like this.
So this is an example of something that we saw. Like, there were sirens going, there were announcements made, and people thought they were safe because of that tsunami wall. And you can see in the background there's people lining up along the roadway. And I think it's great that they got to that point, but I think in such a tsunami zone that you have to go further. If you can see the water, if you're that close to it and you see it's flooding, you shouldn't stand around and wait. You need to get higher up. You need to get out of that area.
That green building is actually where we were about a half an hour earlier. That's the Fishermen's Union building, and that's where the porpoises get butchered, and we were there filming. And that is literally where we were standing half an hour earlier. And yeah.
And at this point, the water had rushed back again after this, so that's why I mentioned that they should be evacuating further.
The water actually, all the houses on the right-hand side of that picture, the water went up past those houses. So they are well within where the water
came. So all of those houses on the right-hand side were destroyed at one point. So.
On the right-hand side, you can see a large boat. That is the boat that was on top of the apartment building. It doesn't look like much, but those are all houses around the boat. So the devastation went quite far. Like the whole city was pretty much destroyed. Being in a boat, you think you'd be safe again, but if you didn't leave in time, you got washed in with the waves as well. And for example, that island I showed you earlier, this is it pretty much underwater. Next.
This is, when I said before, the houses on the right-hand side, these are those houses. And you can see, you know, what didn't get destroyed by the surge of water. All night and all the next day we heard explosions of propane tanks and houses that caught fire. Forest fires spread very quickly, and all night they were fighting forest fires around the town. When we woke up in the morning, the hills were on fire just to, you know, it just seemed like one thing after another. And they had helicopters that were bringing water up into the forest, the surrounding areas, because there were people that were in the forest in the surrounding areas taking shelter, and you know, it was very dry and the forest fires were spreading very quickly.
So again, in the foreground, you can see that there is one tsunami wall standing, and then on the right-hand side, that is the tsunami wall, which is now gone. And again, fire started really rapidly. This was only maybe half an hour after the first wave came in, and they were like, it started very quickly and it spread very quickly as well. So this is towards after, I think, the first wave. And that used to be a building. The main structure was still standing, surprisingly, but the rest of it was gone.
This sort of gives you an idea as to how high we were so lucky to make it up to the top of that hill, and there was only about 15 of us in total. There was probably only maybe 6 or 7 Japanese citizens up there with us, and we couldn't figure out why more people didn't come up to the top of this hill, other than we think that people trusted the tsunami wall and that they didn't think that they needed to. Maybe they thought it was a false alarm, or I don't know, but unfortunately more people didn't take shelter on this hill. We just got a couple of videos to show how we doing for time. Okay, so the first video is the earthquake, and we filmed the entire thing, until our cameras literally ran out of space. So this is when the earthquake hit. It sort of gives you an idea as to how close to the water we were, and if you focus, it's hard because we're moving around and the camera's moving around. You can't tell what's us, what's the earthquake and what's us stumbling. But if you focus on the wheels of the car, you can see how much the car is jumping around. And if you focus on the people standing on the screen, then you can see how we're just being tossed around. So.
We want to get our asses out of here. This might be a tsunami inducer.
Yeah. We are in an earthquake right now.
Look at the water.
I can barely.
Things are coming apart.
The ground is shaking phenomenally right now. Like, I can barely stand up. Look at the cars. This is crazy.
It's a lot. Holy. It's going on forever.
Never been in an earthquake like this before.
You right.
People are lying on the ground here.
Look at the dirt coming around the hill. Oh wow! All around you, look, things are collapsing.
Something big fell over right now. Dirt just coming off the hills everywhere. Things are collapsing over there. It looks like all the birds are up in the air, and the ground is still shaking. And this could be a tsunami, so we have to freaking get out of here. This is nuts. It sort of calms down a little bit, but
You know what?
Still rumbling.
Yeah.
We're going to get out of here. Everything that you see in that video was completely wiped out. It's completely, absolutely gone. The second video shows us on the hill, and it sort of shows the water rising. And if you sort of focus on all the buoys in the water, those are for scallops. They have scallops on them. It's a fisheries thing. And they when we got there before the earthquake hit, they were all lined up straight in lines, very, very orderly. So you can see how they're all over the place, and that's because the tides are just churning. There was whirlpools even starting right away. So. Okay, so it looks like the waves are starting to come in. You can see all the buoys are moving. All the buildings over there are already underwater. It hasn't been a wave come in yet. The entire ocean is just surging forward now. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Everything's just, oh my God. So you can see how fast the water level rises. It's so fast. Third video shows the waves. So the original surge of water had already gone in and destroyed the city, and then the water had sucked out, exposing the seafloor, and these are the actual tsunami waves that we saw. We'll pause it halfway through. I mean, even when we were watching it, we kept saying to each other, I thought the waves would be bigger, and we weren't looking at anything to scale, and we'll sort of show you that halfway through this video. So, to put it to scale, right by the mouse there, that's a one-story house. And in the foreground there's another house, but that little tiny white dot is a one-story house, so I wouldn't know how high that wave is, but the dark spot is a door on the house. So that is a huge, huge wave.
Look at that black wave coming towards us. Wow.
I can't believe. I don't know if they've been caught or not, but these waves in front of us here are black. Oh, and there's another earthquake.
Oh.
After the original earthquake, it was constant aftershocks. Like literally every 15 minutes there was another aftershock. I mean, at some points we felt like we were on a boat, that everything was just swaying. And I mean, they kept going for the entire time or the remainder of the time we were in Japan. The day after, we got woken up with a 6.3 aftershock, and about every hour there was another earthquake.
There were about 200 aftershocks within the 24 hours after the original. It was constant.
Okay, so this is our last video, and this is after the original surge of water in the waves and us checking the damage. Like I said, we were up on a hill. It was about 100 feet high. What we didn't know was that the road on either side of the hill was gone, and this is us filming going down to check the damage. And one thing that was really eerie, I mean, there was no people around. We did not see any people. We were looking for people. But the sea life that was left on everywhere, there were octopus, there was squid, there was scallops, there were fish. It was just littered with sea life. Being that we were sea shepherds, we were tossing fish back in the water. I mean, we couldn't bear to see any suffering after all this. Everything is just completely destroyed here. You're going to have to just toss them, you guys, like a baseball. Seriously, don't get too close. But toss them as far as you can. Yeah, they got a fish that's alive. just solid oil and sea life that have all been tossed up here. Jesus, there's cars upside down right here. Do you guys see these cars upside down?
Yeah, I saw them.
Whatever buildings were here were completely destroyed.
Brian, Scott.
There's a roof here.
I think that was Mike trying to get hold of you. I didn't hear anybody calling. I was asking, did the water over top of the levee? Affirmative.
Yeah. So this is the road that we're supposed to get out on. The road has been completely destroyed. You can see it poking out there and all the water rushing away. There's a car that's just destroyed right there.
Completely destroyed. Actually, water is flowing down in the river.
There's oil everywhere. I don't know how the we're going to get out of here.
We're going to have it up.
That's the road. We're going to have to bushwhack it, you guys. Like, we're going to have to climb out of here.
Yeah, we're going to have to.
I will just make a quick comment. Just like you'll see that we were walking across a lot of flat cement surfaces. Those were foundations of used to be homes, so those were all gone. And Marley mentioned that there were cars everywhere. We did go to those cars to see if there's anybody alive in them that we could possibly help. Thankfully, we didn't find anybody injured or otherwise in those vehicles, but we did do our best to keep an eye on that to see if we could help anybody along the way.
We did have to bushwhack our way out. We had to climb over a mountain to get out of there. There was no other route around that. So I think we're out of time. Okay. If anybody has any questions later, yeah.
It's always good to follow something so compelling. I think I will not have as much difficulty convincing you of the importance of being aware of and prepared for earthquakes after that. Okay, I wanted to show you this. This was taken from the web shortly after the Chilean earthquake, and you can see it here with all of its aftershocks, and Haiti up there. And a lot of people thought that because we had those earthquakes that suddenly the Earth was extremely active. But as you can see, there are a lot of other earthquakes happening around the world. The yellow ones are within 2 weeks, and 5 years are what are displayed on this map. So it's an actually extremely active planet. I used to work for the International Seismological Center processing global earthquakes, and I can assure you there are a lot of earthquakes in the world every day. I like to show this map also because you can easily see where the earthquakes are occurring are generally along plate boundaries, and so the earthquakes are essentially outlining plates. You have, unfortunately, it's just off the side of the map here, but along here you have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is a ridge system that goes up through the Atlantic Ocean, through Iceland, a very exciting place for earthquakes. The country is essentially being ripped apart by a ridge. I desperately want to go. You have the Caribbean plate here, the Nazca plate, the Cocos plate, the Cocos, the Nazca, the very large Pacific Sea plate here, extremely large plate, and of course the North American plate, and that's the one that we are living on. You can also see easily from this what they call the ring of fire, that ring of intense seismic and volcanic activity that lines or rims the Pacific Ocean. And we are part of that. So certainly we're part of that whole system that is extremely active. Oh, and this little thing here is Hawaii. Now, I also took the same image from the website after the Japanese earthquake, and it looks very different. This kind of earthquake doesn't happen every year. It's a very special earthquake, and it's a very dangerous one, and it's what we are often called great earthquakes. I don't like using great because it kind of sounds positive. It's a megathrust earthquake, and it does include a tsunami, so they're sort of the very dramatic events. So I wanted to now hone in on Canada. We are, of course, under this sort of area here. This is the entire catalog, so don't freak out too much. But, of course, earthquakes are plotted on top of each other because they tend to happen in similar areas all the time. So it's hard to see how many earthquakes are happening. So, okay, at my office, I work in Sydney, near Victoria, and we locate all the earthquakes in this area. And the people in Ottawa locate all the other earthquakes in the country. And it's hard to tell, but we locate about twice the number of earthquakes that they do, and we do it with the same number of seismologists, so I think we're pretty skookum at Sydney. And in the past year, we've located more than 3,000 earthquakes. So I'm not sitting waiting for something to happen. I'm actually struggling to keep up with the earthquakes that we have, so it is a very active coastline. The reason we have, and I should mention also, all that data that we gather goes into developing the National Building Code of Canada. This is a simplified map from that code. And we are under that red area under there. And it is a very good code. It's very similar to California's, but you know, we're always trying to learn, and we've learned a lot from the Japanese, and they learn a lot from themselves, and I'm going to mention that in a little while, but when you don't have a lot of historic earthquakes in your region, you really do have to look around the world to learn from those other experiences. So the reason we have these earthquakes is well, for me as a seismologist, this is the place to study them, not in Ottawa, because we have all three major types of plate boundary right off our coastline. So to give you an example, we have a ridge system here. This is like a mini version of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. What happens is you have these two plates, the two oceanic plates. They're moving apart, away from each other. And as they move away, a gap opens up between them. But material from the mantle comes up, fills in that gap, cools, and becomes new plate. So ridge systems are essentially like plate factories. They're creating new plate all the time. Then you have up here, the Pacific plate here is moving off. Oh, I'm getting feedback now. Oh, sorry. The Pacific plate here is moving off toward Japan, where it eventually subducts and becomes the subduction zone that caused the earthquake a few weeks ago. But before it does that, it rubs up against the side of the North American plate here, and a strike slip or transform fault, that's almost identical to the San Andreas fault in California. We see very large earthquakes on this fault, including a magnitude 8.1 in 1949, a lot of magnitude 7s and 6s and 6.5s since then. However, we can't force the press to publish these events, and because there are not a lot of people living up there, it's often not considered newsworthy. So we publish them on our websites, we send out earthquake reports to the media, but they don't necessarily make it into the news unless it's a slow news day. Finally, sorry for all the news people here, but that's the truth. And then finally, you have a subduction zone. And that's, of course, what everyone here is interested in. This is where one plate, here the Juan de Fuca plate, is subducting beneath the North American plate. And the bonus with subduction zones is you get volcanoes, because when the plate gets down deep enough, the temperatures and pressures are really high, and what happens is the plate melts. That melt comes up through the overriding plate and creates along here an arc or a line of volcanoes. So the reason you have volcanoes around the Pacific Rim is because of the subduction zones. So Japan, Alaska, New Zealand, Chile, Peru, Mexico, they all have volcanoes because they have those subduction zones. Now, the other thing I want to mention is you have earthquakes in 3 different places in subduction zones. Of course, you have them on that interface. In other words, on the surface where the 2 plates are touching. They get stuck, and they build up pressure over hundreds of years, and then they release that pressure in the form of a very large earthquake, those megathrust earthquakes. And they have a lot of aftershocks, and then the stress builds up again over a few hundred years. Now, those, as you can gather, are infrequent. However, they are extremely damaging events. They're extremely dramatic, and that's the kind of earthquake that we saw in Japan. That's not the only kind of earthquake we have here, however. We also have earthquakes within the two plates. We have them within the subducting Juan de Fuca plate as it bends and goes down into the mantle. One example of that was the 2001 earthquake near Olympia, the Nisqually earthquake it's called. That was magnitude 6.8. It caused quite a bit of damage in Olympia, Seattle, at the Boeing airfield. A lot of people felt it in the Victoria area. A lot of people in the Fraser River Delta area felt that one. So that's the kind of earthquakes we can see actually quite regularly. The other kinds are in the North American plate. What's happening there is, this is sort of a cartoon of what's happening, but it gives you a good idea. These two plates are stuck together, but they're still moving toward each other. So what happens is that Juan de Fuca plate is pushing on the North American plate and causing it to bend. And it's sort of like if you push a tablecloth along a table and it ripples, only this is a 30-kilometer thick piece of rock that's rippling. So, of course, if you bend something like that, it's got to release stress, and it does that in the form of earthquakes. And that's why you have quite strong earthquakes throughout this region. And really, they can happen anywhere in that region. So anywhere along Vancouver Island, even toward the mainland, you can have those magnitude 6.5, 7 earthquakes, even as high as 7.5 within that North American plate. And because it's within the North American plate, it's shallow, and that means it's closer to you. And I'm going to get to why that's important. So I'm going to give you a few examples here. I mentioned this one before. This is the magnitude 8.1 earthquake that was just off Graham Island in Haida Gwaii. It's quite large for a strike-slip earthquake, and it was felt quite widely. This is not based, by the way, these colors and these contours are not based on instrument data. These are based on people. And we still do these maps. So if you ever feel an earthquake, please go to our website, earthquakescanada.ca. Go to our website, tell us how you experienced it. We get all geeky and excited because it's more data. We've only got about 100 seismometers in Western Canada. We've got hundreds of thousands of people. You become more instruments, essentially, and we learn so much from you. So what we do is, this is sort of a very rough one. This is very simple isoseismal map because, of course, there were not a lot of people up there in 1949, but it gave us a good idea. You tend to have high intensities close to the earthquake, and then lower and lower intensities further away. So people felt it as far as the Rocky Mountains and down into northwestern Oregon, which is quite far-reaching, really, but very, very intently in this area. So it's sort of like a bullseye pattern. Similar idea here. This is the Courtenay-Comox earthquake of 1946, magnitude 7.3, so very similar to those kinds of earthquakes I mentioned before. This happened in the North American plate, quite shallow. A lot of damage to masonry. Masonry, by the way, is not a good thing to build with if you're in a seismically active area. Essentially, it's mortar, which degrades over time. It's trying to hold together bricks or rock, and it doesn't do well under the shearing forces of an earthquake. And also it's heavy, so when it comes down in you, it's a really bad situation. So, of course, the first things to go are chimneys, because they're masonry and they're tall and skinny with something heavy strapped to one end. So up here we've got the Courtenay Elementary School. The chimney used to be up here. It fell through the school roof, landed in the classroom. We actually had a lady call me a couple of weeks ago to say that she felt this earthquake and her sister couldn't go to school because she was in this classroom. This is why you can see very easily why we tell students to get underneath their desks in earthquake drills. You really need to protect yourself from falling debris. So you need to do that duck, cover, and hold. I cannot say that enough times in my career. Duck, cover, and hold on. Here, this is a brick building. The brick has fallen down into the street. If you are outside, please stay away from brick buildings. And finally, this is the Nisqually earthquake I mentioned that was down near Olympia. Similar type of damage in the Olympia area, almost entirely masonry, lots of brick falling around. Okay, now I don't have an isoseismal map for the megathrust earthquake because we didn't have a lot of people taking sensors back then. So what I did was we took the shaking map from the Indonesian earthquake because its rupture zone is the same length as our subduction zone. It's about 1,000 kilometers long. So we took that, we rotated it, and we stuck it over our area. So you can see this earthquake, were it to happen, would be felt as far as the Saskatchewan-Manitoba border, which I think is pretty impressive. If you take the Chilean earthquake, magnitude 8.8, you take its little map like this, and you stick it over top of our region, people in Toronto could feel the earthquake. These are extremely powerful events. Now, the red area, quite a lot of damage, and a lot of very strong shaking. Yellow, some damage, still some strong shaking, and then of course just the gray area is just shaking, no structural damage. I should mention that with the subduction zone earthquake, because they are so large, the shaking goes on for a long time. You're looking at 3 to 5 minutes. And I think you felt quite long shaking too, didn't you, for several minutes? So that's it. I got back up here. So 3 to 5 minutes of strong shaking. And I think it's going to feel like a lot longer, just because it's such an extreme experience, very unusual experience. So you need to duck cover and hold on and just stay it out. And once the shaking stops, you're supposed to count to 60 before you come out from underneath your desk or whatever, because there could still be things falling. The main hazard here is falling debris. You're not looking at complete collapse, generally speaking, so you just want to protect yourself from that falling debris. And of course, with the subduction zone earthquake, you get tsunami, so you need to consider that. And if you're at the coast, I want you hoofing it uphill as fast as you can, and if you go too far, big deal, you went for a hike. Sorry, I'm a bit naggy about this, but it's only because I care. So I wanted to point out, this is data from the colleagues of mine who've done the stats. In a 50-year window, I'm hoping to live another 50 years, but in a 50-year window, there's a 10% chance that I will experience that earthquake. I think those stats are actually quite high. If there were lotteries with that kind of odds, I'd be buying tickets. So it's a 1 in 10 chance you'll experience that earthquake. And it's a far, far higher chance you'll experience one of those magnitude 7s or whatever in the North American plate or in the subducting plate. So there's an extremely good chance. I can almost guarantee you will experience a strong earthquake. So this is why I'm extremely passionate about teaching about these things. I'll try not to be too naggy, though. Okay, so I wanted to show you, we don't have a lot of information from the 1700 earthquake. We do have an Aboriginal legend talking about an eagle and a whale, where an eagle comes down, picks up a whale, takes it to a mountaintop, and they fight. There's a real shaking of the earth. The whale's tail flops down into the water recedes, and then it comes back in a huge wave and engulfs the villages. That's essentially what happened. You had your tsunami, and then you had your earthquake, and then you had your tsunami. And it's actually in a lot of artwork along the coastal villages from Queen Charlotte's down into Oregon. So it's a wide-reaching story. Now, this is a little bit more of a scientific approach. This is Kenji Sataki's tsunami model. He's a Japanese researcher. He looked at tsunami records from the coastline along the east coast of Japan. He looked at the heights of the waves and the times of the waves' arrival. He thought that when he did his reverse modeling, what he would come up with is a Mexican earthquake. He came up with a Cascadia earthquake. Until he did that research many years ago, we didn't know we had a subduction zone. This confirmed it. So I will show you his model. It takes about 4 hours to get to Hawaii, about 8 to get to Japan, about 13 or 14 to get to New Zealand. And you can see it keeps reverberating. It's not just that one wave, it's ripples going out. And when it hit the Japanese coast, it was about 2 meters high in most places. On our coast, on the outer coast of BC, it was about 10-meter wave coming in. And if you make it into feet, it's much more impressive. Bigger number. Okay, so what to expect from an earthquake? Well, I think shaking is pretty obvious. This is affected by magnitude. One thing, the length of shaking and the severity of shaking is going to be greater with the greater magnitude. Distance, the closer you are to an earthquake, the more you're going to feel it. And of course, you felt it very strongly because you were very close. The depth. The shallower it is, the more you'll feel it. And site conditions make a huge impact. I will get into that in a second. And these will, of course, all contribute to possible structural damage. And I'll give some examples of that, too. So I apologize. This is not nearly as nice a video as what you just saw. It's very grainy. It was taken from a Kobe store. This store itself was not damaged, but it gives you an idea how much things move. And it's a very short clip because they lost power, but it gives you a good idea. And I'll show it twice just because it's so grainy, but it'll give you an idea of what to expect. pretty impressive, isn't it? Okay, and I think that he's getting a little nervous about that thing falling over. There you go again. So, okay. Depth. I just want to compare these two earthquakes. They're the same size. There's the Northridge earthquake up here in the Hollywood Hills, and this is the Olympia earthquake. Caused a little bit of damage. I mean, you saw, bricks in the street. The Capitol building was damaged a little bit. It could still be used. And there was only some minor injuries from things falling. The Northridge earthquake was much more shallow. And my uncle-in-law lived up in the Hollywood Hills, and he couldn't live in his house for months, and most people in that area were in the same boat. It was actually extremely bad, and it's merely a case of depth. This earthquake, the waves had to come up through all this material, 50 kilometers of material before it got to the surface, so all that time it's weakening. This, you're right at the focus. It's going to be a much more severe experience. Site conditions. If you're at the top of a hill, you can have focusing because the waves come up and they add up at the tip. There was an earthquake in Hawaii a few years ago. A lot of the telescopes were damaged because, of course, they're on mountaintops. And you also have amplification sometimes, and that most often happens if you are on soft sediments. So Fraser River Delta comes to mind. If you're on a river delta, if you're on a river bank, anything where there's soft sediments, reclaimed land is also another culprit. Now these are seismograms that we recorded for an earthquake in the Georgia Strait area. Their stations are about the same distance from the earthquake, so they should all be about the same size, except that these ones were on rock and these were on the Fraser River Delta. And that's a lot of amplification. It's pretty impressive. I sent that to my dad, who lives in Richmond. Okay, I'm going to show a few examples of damage. Now, obviously, this is the before picture. Thankfully, we do not anymore build like this in Canada, and we don't generally build like this. This is very heavy cement floors with very light walls that are really not very structural. There's not a lot of strength in those walls. And it's fine if all you're dealing with is gravity, but the strongest waves in an earthquake are horizontal shearing. So what it essentially does is it pushes these buildings and they go, and so you end up with that. So this is Haiti. This is how they build in Haiti. And this is unfortunately how they are continuing to build in Haiti. Haiti has no building code. And you can't tell me, I'm too angry about that to speak about it, but it's a terrible situation. Okay, I mentioned before, if you're outside, you want to stay away from brick buildings. This is a brick building in Loma Prieta, the Loma Prieta earthquake in San Francisco. 3 people were killed down here by the falling bricks. So you really do need to stay away from debris, power lines, bricks, bad things. However, you can retrofit brick buildings. We've got a lot of beautiful historic brick buildings in Nanaimo, Vancouver, Victoria. We want to enjoy those. They're part of our heritage. So if you reinforce them and add strengthening, they can survive the earthquake enough. I mean, this probably will still have to be torn down. It's got, unfortunately, some bad cracks in it. But the people and the contents got out safely. And the people are our number one priority. So this is why we are doing this to schools around BC. There's a huge program to retrofit the older schools around BC, including a couple in Nanaimo. They're listed here. Wellington Secondary and Dufferin Crescent. I don't know them, but maybe you do. So this is phase 1, and hopefully they'll continue with this. And then once they're finished with the schools, hopefully they'll start attacking the other buildings if the community doesn't themselves. But it's a really great idea. To add its strengthening. Okay, this is how not to do reinforced concrete. This is a 2-level highway. This is collapsed onto this level. They've got fantastic rebar going along the columns and along the beams, but there's nothing holding that together. So as soon as any concrete spalls away, it just bends. It's unable to to do its job and hold things up. So you need to have other reinforcement around it. Same here with the Kobe earthquake. This beam is now being held up by a Coke machine, probably the only time it's been healthy. And you can just see how it's collapsed away. The only rebar holding it together, it looks almost like wire. It's really insufficient. But they learned a lot from this earthquake. Holy cow, did they ever overhaul their building code. And very, very little damage happened from the earthquake a few weeks ago. Very little. It was almost entirely from the tsunami. So, you know, we've learned a lot from them too. This is a classic soft story failure. A soft story, usually it's the ground floor, because what will happen is you have shops or parking on the ground level, so it's a bit open, and then up above you have apartments or businesses, a lot more walls, a lot more stiffness and strength. And so what happens is it fails because this is moving at a different frequency to this because it has a different amount of strength in it. And so what you do is you just add reinforcement to this level, and it should be fine. This is another one that went wrong. There used to be parking underneath that. This is something slightly different. Again, Kobe. I have a lot of Kobe examples because, boy, was that ever a good learning experience. Their building code used to be that you only had to reinforce up to a certain height, which corresponded to about the 4th or 5th story. So, of course, there's a difference in strength at that height. So what happens is the building moves, and you have here the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th floor. There's a floor in there that's pancaked. And an engineer I worked with, he's retired now, but he went to Kobe after this earthquake, and he said there was almost like a line along the city where there was this failure had occurred. So secondary hazards, this is stuff triggered by the earthquake. Fire, as you saw in the films and the pictures, fire is often triggered by an earthquake. Usually gas mains. In this case, San Francisco, people were heating with fire back then, and they were also cooking with fire. So a lot of a big fire broke out in San Francisco. It did not help that 3 of the 4 water mains into the city ruptured during the earthquake, and the fire chief was killed. So they were leaderless, they had no water, and so they started making a fire break by blowing up buildings. Unfortunately, they also blew up a chemical factory, so another learning experience. I'm not trying to be cynical. Okay, ground failure. Slumping and landslides, very, very common after an earthquake, particularly if it's after a rainy season, and we do have those here. Liquefaction. This is like if you go down to the beach and the tide's been out for a while and it's quite firm, you can walk on the beach, no problem. It's very, very firm. If you stand in one place and jiggle your legs around, your feet sink a little bit and the water comes up between your toes, that's liquefaction. If you stop jiggling, the water goes away and it becomes solid again. And no, it does not mean that Richmond is going to disappear. It does, however, mean that there will be pockets of liquefaction around places like Richmond, and that's a huge concern because I will show you in a minute. Surface rupture. This is not the Hollywood scenario where the ground opens up and cars and people fall in and there's coursing lava, and that only happens if Tommy Lee Jones is around. This is what happens. You have the ground is still together and it's offset. It moves like that. This is California. We don't have any examples of that up here because we do not have surface rupture faults in BC. The surface rupture faults you see when you're driving around BC were created when BC was created. And as far as we can tell, they haven't seen any activity. So they're inactive. However, that doesn't mean that they won't start up again, but it's more likely to happen deeper in the earth. And finally, I will talk about tsunami, but I sort of give them their own little chapter in my speech just because they're kind of a big deal, as you could tell from the videos. Okay, a couple examples of landslides. This is San Salvador. The buildings did actually very well in this earthquake. Unfortunately, the landslide here took out 2.5 blocks. Even worse, in China, in the Sichuan earthquake, a colleague of mine was there visiting family in China. He was going to see the buildings for the Beijing Olympics just before they had their Olympics. And so he took a side tour and toured these places. And when he gave a seminar at my work, I don't think there was a dry eye in the house. It really reinforces why we chose this science. A few examples of liquefaction. This is a crane at the quayside in Kobe. As I said before, a lot of Kobe. There's a crack here, you can see, and here where sun's sort of boiling up. We call it boiling. It's not really hot, but that's what they call it when it bubbles up onto the surface. And this crane's just toppled onto these shipping containers. This is probably the most severe example of liquefaction in Nagata. The building is so far reclined that people escaped the building by crawling out of their front windows and walking down the front of the building. And then this is Turkey, where this building is leaning on its neighbor. And you can see the building itself does not look badly damaged. It's just tilted, it's just moved. However, if you think about what's in your house, like heavy refrigerators sliding across the floor towards you, this is still a very dangerous situation. Okay, probably the coolest example of surface rupture you will ever see. And the reason I can be happy when I'm talking about this is thankfully the water level behind this dam was low when the earthquake happened, so the villages downstream were spared. You are looking, I wish I had a person in this for scale. This is 10 meters of vertical displacement and 2 meters in and out of the screen. You guys are essentially looking along the fault. And when the company was given money to build a new dam, rebuild their dam. They built a new dam upstream because this one's now a tourist attraction. So you can go to Taiwan and see this if you want. This is the same earthquake. It pulled apart this bridge. This is the fault. It created a waterfall. And thankfully, I do have a lady in there for scale. So you can see, this is the fault here. It's a series of ocean waves. It's not just one. And it's not the first one that's the largest. I want to stress that. Because if you're not necessarily here, but you might be somewhere else where there's a tsunami. Tsunami comes in and goes out. You don't go down to that point because it's going to come in higher next time. It's most often generated by an earthquake. It can also be generated by coastal or underwater landslides and by meteor impact. Two main types of tsunamis. One is our local one. We have our own subduction zone. We have our own tsunami source. It's off our coastline here. The travel time for the west coast, so Tofino, Long Beach, all along this coast here, Highway 1, that is minutes. We're looking at 15 to 20 minutes. So you're running fast, okay? Notification, you do not wait for a siren or someone to tell you to leave. If you feel strong shaking for more than, this is when I really get naggy, I'm very sorry, but if you feel strong shaking for more than a minute, I really want you running uphill. If you're along a coastline, if you can't run up a hill, if the hill's too far away, vertically evacuate in a strong building. Going upstairs is often the best bet. And then there's a distant source. And this is distant earthquakes like Japan, Alaska. You think of 1964, it impacted Port Alberni. It only affects the outer coast. If you're around here in Nanaimo, Vancouver, you're not going to be affected by something like this. This is really strictly an outer coast situation. And I happened to be in Mexico during the Japan earthquake. And I didn't see anything like what these ladies saw. But I did witness the tsunami in Mexico, and that's probably the only time I've ever raised my voice at my husband. I swear, we don't do that, but I was, get the hell away from that water line, and tell those other people to come with you. They didn't want to come. They had never seen those tidal pools. They wanted to stay and look at them. And they were really running. I mean, it was not, thankfully, it turned out not to be that dangerous, but it came in over a meter in less than a minute. It's fast. Okay, so a few pictures. These are mostly from Indonesia. So tsunami, as I mentioned, are fast. In the open ocean, they go over 1,000 kilometers an hour. So faster than a big jet. As they get closer to land, what happens is the speed of the tsunami is directly proportional to the depth of the water. So as they get into shallower waters, they slow down, but that's when they build up. because you've got the same volume of water slowing down and you've got this force behind it. That's why it comes up and it ends up being that impressive wave that you saw on those videos. It is extremely forceful, and generally speaking, this is what it looks like. It is more like a wall of water. Unless it hits something that causes it to break, generally speaking, it looks like this creeping wall of water. So all those people who go out to surf it, really is nothing they can use, and it's just an invitation for the Darwin Award. Also, there is a lot of debris. And as you saw in the videos, that debris is houses, cars, and you are very small and vulnerable compared to those things. And there's a poor person here, and I doubt very much that they survive this. So this is not how to observe them. This journalist not only put his own life at risk, but the life of his cameraman. Thankfully, what came in was about 20 centimeters. But it could have been worse. And I think that was pretty stupid. Finally, I'm going to show you this model. This is from Joseph Czerniawski, who I actually spoke to today. I wanted to ask him about Nanaimo. We had a nice long chat this morning. He developed these models. Unfortunately, these are only showing you the speed of the waves, the timing of them. You can't really see it down here, but there's a clock. The red is, of course, high, and blue is the low, so that's the trough. And it just shows you essentially the timing and the severity of the wave as it's going around the coastline. However, this is essentially a wall coast. It's just hitting the wall and coming back out. It's not showing you how far inland it's going to go. Those models take a lot of very high resolution topography data, and that takes a lot of money. And unfortunately, it's not there right now. But hopefully they will do it soon. They have started the model for Ucluelet. They're doing the higher risk zones first. So here we go. I'll just read out the time. About 15, 20 minutes here for this coast. Takes about an hour to get around to Suuk-Esquimalt area. About an hour and a half to get to Victoria. Up here in Sydney, it's about 2 hours. And it gets kind of caught up in these islands a bit. So what makes its way around to Georgia Strait, luckily for you guys, is much lower. You're looking about a meter or two. Now, that does depend a lot on whether it's a high tide, whether there's a storm surge. So it's still a good idea to get away from the coast, just in case. Humor me. And it goes on, as you can see, for several hours. We're looking at 4.5 hours now, and it's still going on. Now, what I'm going to show you is essentially a close-up. It's a faster one. It's a close-up of, am I doing it? This area. And there's Orcas Island there. And it's sort of shaped like this, right? I want you to look at this bay. Okay, so you'd think it was protected by these islands, but it's not. It's that underwater topography. That's why these models are so important. Also, this bay on Whidbey Island, it really gets pummeled too. So these models are extraordinarily important and illuminating. The speed of the wave is also important to consider, as well as the height. Going in and out of Esquimalt Harbor, this is over 10 knots. And I wanted to show you this. I got this today from Joseph. They're looking at different places because, as I mentioned before, tsunamis can be generated by coastal or underwater landslides. Those can be generated, be triggered by earthquakes, but not necessarily. These could happen on their own, and there would be no warning. However, a strong earthquake could potentially trigger it. So they're looking partly at this area as a potential for failure. So they're doing modeling on that right now. And once again, I think you are somewhat protected by the islands here from that. A little. I'd still get away from the coast. Okay, long-term issues, loss of utilities, water, electrical, internet is actually important. Homelessness, if your house is damaged structurally, you may not be able to stay in it. You may not have a job if your business is damaged. Lack of hygiene, and boy, did we learn a lot from Katrina, and that's actually discussed a lot in my circles. And then finally, I wanted to touch on the Japan earthquake. Just briefly, you've seen a lot of this. Those are the times of the first wave, and I was here on this coast. This is the tsunami coming into Sendai Airport. The coast is along here, surrounding the terminal. And as has been described many times, it's like toys being tossed around. There's no weight to them, it seems. The wall of water coming in at Natori. And to remember, this is my last slide. Please remember, large earthquakes have happened in the past, and they will happen again. Please be prepared, and you'll be getting onto that in a moment. Duck, cover, and holder, and bless their little cotton socks. Those are two Associated Press journalists under their desks during the earthquake in Tokyo. So, good for them. And expect aftershocks, and respect that tsunami. And thank you very much for listening. And a little promo. Everything I said, well, a condensed version of what I said is on these sheets of paper, and on them is our website and our contact information. If you call that and ask for me, I will answer any question you come up with after today. Okay?
So while we get set up here with the PowerPoint presentation, I'd like just to take a few minutes. First off, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ron Lambert. I'm Fire Chief of City of Nanaimo. I'm also responsible for 911 and fire communications, as well as emergency management in the City of Nanaimo. First, I'd just like to recognize the speakers that have come together tonight, because I think it's certainly they volunteered their time tonight, which is fantastic. And Marley and Carissa, thank you for sharing your experience. And Allison, I'm actually counting my age and I'm working the numbers, because hopefully it doesn't happen in my lifetime. Well, maybe I do. I'd also like to take a very quick moment and thank Mitch from Nanaimo News Bulletin for his work, the advertising that Nanaimo Bulletin has done. In addition to that, Shaw Cable for filming this tonight. They're going to be rebroadcasting this, and they're making the video available for our website. So you'll be able to tell your friends about it and share your experience tonight with them. In addition, as you came in tonight, there was a number of volunteers, and these people are part of our community assistance program, part of the emergency management program. And these are the people that provide emergency social services within the city. And so thanks to them tonight for showing your seats and working the booth out front. Very quickly, I'd like to recognize Mayor and Council for the support that they provide us with public safety. We've got Mayor Jean Rattan here tonight, Councillor Lloyd Cherry, Councillor Jim Kipp, somewhere back there, Councillor Fred Padgey, and Councillor Diana Johnson. And most important, I really appreciate your time tonight coming out and spending the 2.5 hours of the session or the forum tonight. I think there's been some real powerful messages that have come out. And to this point, we've kind of identified just how severe Mother Nature can be. And I think Carissa and Marley's experience certainly depicts that. Allison has indicated that we're not getting out scot-free. And so that leads us to how prepared are we? And we get that question asked quite a bit. And after the previous speakers, I'm not going to answer that question. And there's a reason for that. As you've seen, there's a number of factors. But I do want to pass along tonight some of the preparation that we've done in the city of Nanaimo over numerous years. And for the most part, I think we've got a fairly good emergency management program together. There's a lot of infrastructure in place. Certainly, the Fire Rescue Department, RCMP, the ambulance service are all typical first responders. But in an earthquake situation, we'd also look upon our Public Works Department and the resources that they have. And they're fairly numerous. And the problems that we would get out of a seismic event would, we certainly got a workforce to help overcome some of those problems within a certain period of time. So why won't I answer your question? Because you have to be prepared. And the formula isn't about what the community does for you. It's more about what you do for you. And Karen Lindsay, the Emergency Program Manager, is going to speak more to that later on in the program. So the legislation side of things, and speaking of are you ready, is the provincial government basically by legislation says we're going to have an emergency plan and we're going to be prepared for emergencies when they take place. So the local government's role, there's a number of them. We're required to assess the risks that we have in the community, and I'll talk a little bit about more about that. We need to plan for response. We need to plan for recovery. We need to train and educate people so that they can do those things. And we need to have an emergency management function and things like the Emergency Social Services Group, the work that Karen does with emergency management, the session tonight, all is part and parcel of the emergency management function within the community. One of the keys of the legislation, the provincial legislation, is that we must have an emergency plan. We have to have a bylaw that establishes emergency management within the city. That's all in place. The other aspect of both the bylaw and the legislation is that council is has the authority to establish a local state of emergency, and that's their role under those types of situations. And they also have a number of special powers that is outlined within the provincial legislation as well. Moving on very quickly, because I want to save some time for questions later on, but I talked about assessing risks in the community, and what we have is a hazard risk and vulnerability assessment. And what we do is identify hazards. We've identified 22 of them within the city of Nanaimo. We try to determine what risks those pose, and in fact what we've done is kind of categorize them from not only the risk but the frequency of when these may occur, and the likelihood of when they occur. And finally, anything we can do to mitigate these types of emergencies, and that's easier said than done. Because when you talk about some of the older buildings that we have in place and people's expectation, well, why don't we upgrade that school, or why don't we upgrade some of our heritage buildings? The problem with that is there's an extreme expense to that. So it's got to balance out between the economic viability and what we can do to keep people safe. Certainly the City Council's role and local government's role in new buildings is to meet the codes that Alison spoke about earlier. So enforcing the National Building Code within the city of Nanaimo. So going back to the hazards, we've identified 22 of them. And quickly, I won't go through each one of these. They are on our website, I believe. Thanks, Karen. But I want to make the seismic connection here, because if you look at a seismic event, there's a number of things that are on this list that also threaten us as well. And that includes dam failure. And even though our dams have been inspected and in some cases upgraded, we still have some potential of that. Flooding, certainly, to some degree, particularly if there's a breach in one of those dams under a more severe seismic event. In addition to some of the photos that you've seen tonight, you're going to see fires. There's a potential for explosions, and of course we live in an area where We need hazardous materials for industry and natural gas, propane to live by. So those all become hazards under a seismic event. Power outages is probably one of the biggest ones. I think if we had a fairly severe seismic event, earthquake here in Nanaimo, we can anticipate that we're not going to have a lot of power for a number of days until that infrastructure is put back together. And then, of course, the big one is structural collapse. So moving on, our emergency management program, we've organized that fairly well. We actually have a planning committee. We have an emergency response and recovery plan. We've done our risk assessment. We have a lot of coordination, multi-agency coordination. We work with the regional district. We work with a number of other agencies. Certainly we've got a good relationship with the provincial emergency program, and we also work with industry as well. We have a designated emergency coordination center, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later. I talked about our community assistance program, emergency social services. We do lots in public awareness and information like tonight, training and exercises, and a level of readiness overall within the city. Very quickly, I want to just recognize some of the supporting agencies. I've talked about our people, our community assistance program, but we also rely on, in major emergencies, St. John's Ambulance, Nanaimo Amateur Radio Association, Nanaimo Search and Rescue, Salvation Army, and the Coast Guard Auxiliary, to name a few. The emergency response and recovery plan is a fairly comprehensive document. I did bring it with me tonight, and it's actually a document that covers off all the threats that may happen within the city. There's a section in the plan for earthquakes and all the other things that I spoke of as well. The plan, basically, it's designed to guide our efforts in trying to respond and recover from the event. And it also breaks out an organization, it puts responsibilities and coordinates the efforts so that we've got an effective response. And that's the key purpose of an emergency management program. We follow the provincial standard called BCERMS, which stands for the British Columbia Emergency Response Management System, so that there's a lot of the provincial infrastructure and systems that come together seamlessly through our plan and work fairly well. Moving on, we have an emergency coordination center. That's also known in other communities as the Emergency Operations Center. This region has kind of chose the name coordination because that's its primary role. And so it provides support to the site, whether it's the logistical needs that the site needs. It also makes the group in there provides sometimes policy decisions, and it's based on a number of priorities. And I'll just very quickly run through the priorities. I didn't put a slide together, but just very quickly, responder safety is #1 priority, because if our responders aren't safe, then we've got a problem. Second one is to save lives, which is pretty obvious. Third one is reduce suffering, which is connected. 4 is protection of public health. 5 is protecting government infrastructure. 6, protecting property. 7, protecting the environment. And finally, reducing economic and social losses. So when we look at what the Emergency Coordination Center does and we put together action plans to respond out into the community, it's based on those response goals so that we have a logical, rather than just going out and doing whatever we can, we have a logical plan to put in place to help respond and recover within the community. And finally, we're not alone in this. In fact, in my time over the last 10 years, I've been most impressed with the support that we've had out of the provincial government and the Provincial Emergency Program, which now has been renamed to Emergency Management BC. So looking at this slide, basically what it depicts is that the site level is basically where our responders are going to end up, whoever they may be. We have a site support level, which is our emergency coordination center, and their role is to support the requirements that are taking place out on the scene. From there, we're going to need help, particularly in an earthquake, and that help comes out of the province, and it's coordinated within the province. So our immediate needs come out of what's known as a provincial, regional emergency operations center, and that's situated down in Victoria. And right next to that is what's known as the Provincial Emergency Coordination Center. So if we needed federal support, for example, it's coordinated at the provincial level. So while we're, we're a big city, we're almost, 90,000 people, and we don't have tremendous amount of resources for response and emergency services, and we're going to be challenged. And this structure allows us to call upon neighbors, province, to bring in some of the resources we need. So when I get asked the question now, are we ready? I still don't answer it. But I have to pass on that I think from the corporate level, we've got a very solid framework in our approach to emergency management. Could it be better? Well, absolutely. Could there be more resources? Absolutely. Who wants to pay more taxes in the room? Oh, okay. Oh, thank you, sir. So the bottom line is, if we look at a serious event like we've talked about tonight, are we going to be challenged? Absolutely, we're going to be challenged. But we do have some infrastructure in place, and I think the key is, it's not are we ready as the City of Nanaimo, are the citizens of the City of Nanaimo ready? And that's the key message tonight. And with that, I'll pass it on to Karen Lindsay, our Emergency Program Manager. Thanks.
Thank you all for coming. So today I'm going to talk to you about preparedness. And when I hear the chief say, are we prepared, I, on average, probably talk to about 4,000 to 5,000 residents a year through presentations. And would I say we are ready? I would say no, as citizens and as residents. And I always wish there was a way for me to measure, if I've had any impact whatsoever, if I just talk to everybody and I say, here's what you need to do, and everybody goes, oh yeah, that's great, and then they walk back and it's all forgotten. And I wish I could find out how many people actually made kits, or actually started making kits. And that, just by you showing up today, is a step in the right direction. And what I want to encourage everybody to do is to take action. And not just sit here and listen to me and think, oh wow, that's scary, and I know our lives are busy, and I know we have a lot of things going on, but just to start taking the steps. And I think just based on some of the information that you've heard here tonight, it is a real threat for the community. So I'm going to start going through it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the myths. And I hear these all the time. I hear them when I go to presentations. It will never happen to me. It's all insured, so I'm okay. We will all be dead. And I heard that, I kid you not, probably about 2 months ago. You cannot plan for the unforeseen, so I'm too busy, I'm not going to waste my time. If we do not have a disaster, I've wasted my money, and that refers to the making of a kit and to insurance. And that is why we have police, fire, and ambulance. And normally at this point, I usually kind of ask the audience, but just given the size of the number of people here, I'm just going to give you a little bit of stats. So we have a population, as Ron mentioned, of about 80 to 90,000. On a given shift, on a given day in the city of Nanaimo, say a 10 to 12-hour shift, we have about 12 to 16 police officers. We have 16 firefighters on a shift, so again, remember, not in total, 16 firefighters, and we have 3 ambulances. We have 80,000 people. So there's your reality check, and there's the reason you need to get prepared. As you saw from the video that we're seeing with the earthquake that was being experienced in Japan, and we see even some of these smaller ones, if you think you're going to pick the phone up and dial 911 and you're going to receive the response, the rapid response that you receive now from our emergency responders, you're wrong. And I'm not going to sugarcoat and tell you that you're right. Everything will have to get prioritized, and how this community exists right now is going to be dramatically different. So what we want you to do is to be able to prepare yourselves, to get your kits together and be part of that response and part of the recovery, and not part of, actually, not to sound crass, but not part of the problem, because that's what ends up happening. So Ron mentioned that we have 22 threats in the city of Nanaimo. And what I wanted to talk to you today about is, if you prepare for an earthquake, you're prepared for any of the events that happen. And earthquakes, although dramatic and a lot of damage can happen, they're actually lower on the list of likelihood of occurrence of all the other things that can go wrong in this community. So when I'm going through this, I want you to think of prepare the kit, prepare for the worst, prepare for that earthquake. And then some of these other occurrences that will happen in the community, you'll be ready for as well. So hazardous materials is actually our #1 threat in the community. We live in a transportation corridor. We are a major hub for hazardous materials coming in, on and off the island, and that's our #1 threat. Secondly, we see major storms, and all we have to do is look at this past winter and some of the windstorms that we've seen. I remember very fondly 1996, the snowstorm. I think we had 80 centimeters in like one night or something. And I remember that because my parents came from Ontario and I told them it never snowed here. And then we were stuck for 3 days in the house, and I love them, but that's a long time to be stuck in a house with parents, right? Urban interface fires, when we look at Kelowna, that can happen here. And in the south end of Nanaimo last year, we had, I can't remember the exact number, Ron, but it was probably about 20 to 30, and they call them intentionally set fires now, that came very, very close to our residential areas. And when these things start going, they jump, and concrete's not going to stop it. So, fire safe. Pandemic, we saw this with the H1N1 just recently. A bit of a, and this is, pandemic is worldwide. This is not something that's just Nanaimo or Vancouver Island or British Columbia. This is worldwide. We're a global community, we're a global world. People travel, business travel, all those types of things. H1N1, although it didn't certainly have the impact that they were anticipating, the flu actually kills about 5,000 to 6,000 people per year, and I think the H1N1 actually in Canada only killed, it was less than 100, and certainly not to minimize those deaths, but it wasn't as dramatic. What it did do is shed some light on some of the things that our parents and our grandparents taught us about hygiene, washing your hands, coughing into your sleep, all of those things, and really to keep those and bear them in mind when you are involved or if there is a pandemic declared. And then, of course, we have earthquakes. So what are some of the things you can do? And I'm going to go through this fast, but we did provide a lot of literature, which I think some of our volunteers handed out to you when you came in, and I also encourage you to visit the table afterwards because there's a lot of information there. So the one thing that I'd like to remind you to do is to think of this as camping. We prepare to go camping, to a greater degree than we prepare, or a sporting event. You're having a weekend party. We'll spend weeks planning for that, right? Do you have enough food? Do you have enough booze? Do you have, do you have appetizers? Who's bringing what? Who's coming? You're going camping. Do you have beer? Do you have food? We spend a lot of time doing that, and yet we won't plan for those 7 days where we're really going to need it. So think of this like camping. It's as simple as camping, and most of what you have in your home, you can put into your kit. Don't let it be overwhelming. Don't think that you have to go out and spend $1 gazillion to put these kits together. You have most of this. It's just centralizing it into one location, and that's really as simple as it is. So part of your personal and family disaster plan is to identify a safe area in each room of the house, and I thank Allison for doing the drop, cover, and hold on. I don't know how many times I say drop, cover, and hold on, and we had the Great BC Shakeout in January of this year, which the City of Nanaimo participated in. Please remember that. duck, cover, and hold on. And as Alison said, most of the death and injury in an earthquake comes from falling debris. And it's a proven fact, tried and true, it's been proven. So duck, cover, and hold on. Have a sturdy pair of shoes and flashlight by your bed. Identify a family contact. And when we talk about identifying a family contact, we want you to identify a family contact out of the area if possible. The reason for that, in part, is long distance will be restored before local service. Assign roles and responsibilities to each family member, and what we don't want to see is everybody running around going, oh, what do we do? How do I grab this? What do I get? How do I get it? Everybody needs to know what their job is in the household, and if they're not in the household and they're located somewhere else, what is their job to get home, or how did they get home, or where did they go? This is all part of the planning. And where's your family reunion plan? There's no guarantees that this is going to happen, and we saw in Japan there were people stuck in offices overnight because they couldn't get out. So there's no guaranteed, and I hope you like everybody that you work with, because that could be a real reality for us all, that we could be stuck for days in your workplace. So where are you going to meet and how are you going to meet? I attended a conference, and the other message, and parents will hate me for this, but learn how to text. It's imperative that you learn how to text. Texting was the tried and true method of communication after Katrina, post-Katrina. And we had one of the key players speak to us about it, and the reason is the bandwidth is so small, even when cell towers fail. This was confirmed for me. I went and spoke at Vancouver Island University to a group of students, and there was a young man there in Kobe. He was in the Kobe earthquake, and he was in a high-rise, and his parents were in a high-rise, and they were quite some distance away, and he couldn't get out of the high-rise. And he spent 6 hours just texting, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. 6 hours later, it went through to his parents. Well, you can imagine the relief those parents had. So learn how to text. You don't have to do it all the time if it's not your thing. Just learn how to text. The other thing is, if we do have a major earthquake, don't pick up your phones and start calling. This happened in California last year. Everybody picked their phone up. Hey, did you feel that? Where were you? Right? Cell service shut down in 20 seconds. Keep the cells for emergency, and if you have your plans and you're prepared, your family and you will make your way to those areas. So make sure. Cell service, or using your cell, is for emergencies at that point in time, and we certainly want you to use them if you have an emergency, but we don't want you to pick them up to find out if somebody felt the shaking and you didn't. Drop, cover, and hold on. As I said, this is key. Lately, there's been an email that's gone around called the Triangle of Life, and I don't know how many of you have heard about that. And it's a viral email that goes around rapidly, usually after a significant event. And I've addressed this actually in the paper. There was a letter that I wrote to the editor because somebody had asked me about it in a letter. What I encourage you to do, I can't tell you what to do. All we can do is tell you what is deemed the internationally accepted or best standards of protection, and that is drop, cover, and hold on. What I can suggest that you do is, if you're at all uncertain and you really want to look at it, is research it. Educate yourself and then make your decision based on that research. There's a slew of information on the internet, and Triangle of Life, the fellow that promotes it is named Douglas Copps. Google him. Just Google him, or go into your local library and have a look. And hopefully, you'll get the information that you need to make the best decision. When the BC shakeout happens, it's going to happen every January. I encourage everybody to participate, and it takes 1 minute out of your day. Drop, cover, and hold on. And I was actually very impressed when I drove around the downtown core how many buildings actually incorporated evacuation as part of that. So, talk to your employers about it. Ask the questions and see if your employers can get involved in that as well. It's very possible to survive on little, and this is a story out of Japan. 80-year-old woman, and this is maybe it's not too bad. I thought it'd be a little bit small. 80-year-old woman and her 16-year-old son were basically stuck in their house for a week. And how they survived was the house collapsed with them inside, was hit by tsunami waves, but the teenager was able to reach food from the refrigerator, helping the pair to survive for more than a week. They ate very little. Basically, they survived on yogurt, Coca-Cola, and water. And finally, a week afterwards, on that Sunday, he was able to poke his way through the roof and call for help. So when I talk about it being overwhelming and people think, oh, 7 days worth of food, I've got to have this, no, you can survive on very little. Granola bars, trail mix, protein bars. As much as I like to encourage health, health kind of will go out the window to a certain extent when we're looking at food. So you have to look at your canned goods. I think ravioli has a shelf life of 5 years. So put a can of ravioli in. When we look at family reunion, when does the event occur? And this is something that you need if you have teenage children, or if you're, you could be at a mall in North and your spouse or partner could be at a mall in the South. When the event occurs day, night, or weekend, where do you go? What's the season? Where do you meet up? If you have children or you're a caregiver for children, what's the school plan? And that's critical to know. And where is your meeting space? It's good to have a primary and a secondary meeting space. What are needed? What is needed? And all of this information you'll find in your booklets, but we'll just go over it briefly. The minimum you need to be prepared is 72 hours. Realistically, you need to be prepared for 7 days. We are on an island. Victoria and Vancouver will probably receive a lot of the resources first. It's just a reality. So what I really want to encourage you to do is to prepare for 7 days, 1 week. 4 liters of water per person per day. You need food. So as I said, trail mix, granola bars, protein bars, canned food, canned vegetables, all those things that are in your pantry. First aid kit. Sanitation, even after an event such as an earthquake, we all still have to go to the bathroom, and we can't stop that. Somebody said to me, well, we'll all just dig holes in the backyard and go there. Well, now you have a public health crisis. So what we want you to do is to load your kits with a lot of garbage bags. If your house is still habitable, we really would like you to stay at home if you're able, and I'll talk to you about different locations that you can go to. You line your toilets with the garbage bags. When the time comes that you can no longer use them, you tie them up and you set them away from the house, and then as time goes on, City will advise of how that will get disposed. What is your shelter? If you can't stay in your house, do you have a secondary source of shelter? Could be a trailer, could be a tent, could be tarps. Could be anything. Because the other thing that you have to remember is just because you can get off your street, there's no guarantees that when you get onto a main thoroughfare that you're going to be able to get to the different areas. So having those secondary things. Pets are critical, and we saw this in Katrina, where people wouldn't leave their homes or evacuate their homes because they didn't want to leave their pets. So make sure your pets are cared for, because when little Fido's looking at you while you're drinking on your water, they're still a member of that family. So make sure that they're cared for as well, because then we also have another issue that comes up. People can no longer care for the pets, and now we got pets running everywhere, hungry, tired, starving, the whole bit. So make sure your pets are cared for. Water purifying tablets and chlorine, making sure personal comfort and safety. It's not a fashion show. We really won't be caring what each other looks like at this point. So have old shoes, old clothing, old blankets as part of those kits. If you have a pair of shoes that you don't wear as much, throw them in. Because the thing is, if you do end up going from one place to the next, you may need that second pair of shoes depending upon how much debris you're walking through. Emergency information, have that in your kit. Contact information. All of the, everything you can go, and I'll go into documentation in a bit, and have a grab-and-go bag. As Mitch said, he has one in his car. Because what if you can't get home? Or what if you can't get to that reception center? Do you have something in your car? I have a 72-hour kit in my car, and I keep it in my car. And that's just in case I can't get home, or until such a time that I can get home. Other special needs are supplies. If you have mobility issues, do you have somebody that can help you with them? If you have medical conditions, do you have enough medications for them? If you're hearing impaired or you speak a different language, do you have somebody that can either speak for you, or do you have the information written down so that you can communicate it? Again, first aid supply and medications. Somebody asked me, I was at, it was a semi-retirement home, and I said to the group, I said, well, how many people are on medication? And everybody stuck their hand up. And I said, How many people know what the medication is? And about 50% of the people stuck their hand up. And I said, how many knows what the dose is? And not one person stuck their hand up. Life will not be what you know. There will be no debit cards. There will be no going to the pharmacy to renew your prescription. So you better have this information written down somewhere and kept in your kit. Because if you go to the pharmacy, say, I need my prescription renewed, well, what do you take? Well, it's this. Well, it's for, I have seizures, it's for this or that. I can't remember the name. They're not just going to hand drugs out randomly. They need to know what it is that you take. So either take a copy of an old prescription bottle, throw it into the kit, take a photocopy of it, and then cash, loonies, toonies, $5 bills, $20 bills. Don't go big, because when the stores do start opening up, and this is just, unfortunately, it's human nature, what we're seeing in Japan right now is a very calm society because they were prepared. And I'm, I hate to say it, but I really don't know if that's going to be the case here, and I don't think that's going to be the case here. If you go to a corner store with a $50 bill and you want a bottle of water, it's probably going to cost you $50. So it's better to have small denominations and rolls of quarters. Payphones will be restored first before residential phones will be restored. And again, it's all greater good. You have to remember, it's greater good. They're not going to restore Karen's neighborhood because she lives there and they're going to put my phone in service first. They'll always hit the areas with greater good. And we've talked to the phone companies about this. And I think it's 50 cents now a call. And believe it or not, I drove around the city and there's a lot of payphones in this city. You just need to know where they are. Malls. Malls are key ones. Just know where it is. You may have to walk. You may not be driving. Trust me if the roads are out. Documentation, family photos, and this is primarily for reunification, and you see this in disasters around the world where people start pinning photos up of their loved ones. The other thing is if you're hurt or injured and you're in hospital, it's good to have that family photo because you may not be able to speak for yourself. So they will start looking at some of this documentation and, where's this person, what's the name, those types of things. Insurance documents, banking information, credit card information, copies of passports and copies of birth certificates. Keep all this information together in your kit. In addition, what I do is I actually send it to my parents back east. And that's just because I have the ability to do that, but it's a secondary source for me. It has to be somebody you absolutely trust because it is very personal and very confidential information. But should I not be able to access my primary source, I now have a secondary source that I can go to. Where family photos come in really critical is with young children. And to this day, there's kids that were in Katrina that have not been reunited with their parents. Because when evacuation happens, and it can happen here with evacuation, it's not going to be, we're sent out on the bus and go, 2 on this bus, so we got room for 3. It's going to be get your stuff and get out. That's what it's going to be. And so what happened in Katrina is kids and parents were separated getting on the buses. So a 2 or 3-year-old, well, what's your mom look like? Well, her name's Karen, she's got brown hair. Well, how many Karens with brown hair are there in the city of Nanaimo? So some would say probably one too many, right? So anyway, emergency supplies. This is just kind of a list of all the different things that you need. As we said, flashlight, batteries, first aid kits, medication, food and water, fuel and light. You're going to need secondary heat sources, barbecues for cooking. Do you have your propane tanks filled? Again, think of it like taking a week of camping, getting all those things and making sure that they stay together. I encourage everybody to check their kits every 6 months, like you change your batteries for your smoke alarms. Check your kits. Take out whatever items and make it a part of your routine. Make it a part of your life. Don't make this something you kind of slap it together and then 5 years from now, it's like the spare tire. You pull it out and wow, it's flat, right? So make sure you check it. Again, 72 hours and 7 days is realistic. Personal supplies, things that, toilet paper, all those types of things are the things that you need because you won't necessarily have them or be able to get them. So those are the types of things that you need to think about. We brought 3 excellent kits, and I encourage you to go and look at them to see how small it's a. I can't remember what the kit is. I think it's a 5-person or a 20-person kit, and it's a 72-hour. but just a little knapsack, like a gym bag. And there's 3 of them there. These don't have to be these, take up a whole cupboard type of thing. It's just something to keep you going and to read your literature and to start. What I also encourage people to do is, if your time is sensitive and you're busy and you're feeling overwhelmed by it, every Sunday with dinner, throw something in the kit. Somebody said, well, what if it happens and I'm only 2 weeks into it? Well, you got 2 more items in there than you did the time before. And that's how I view it. Where do you go? City of Nanaimo has 4 designated reception centers. If you are not able to stay at your home, it's the preferred option to stay at home. Reception centers, and I mean, we try to do the best to make them as comfortable as we can, but you're getting every walk of life in there. They're packed in, they're not comfortable, and we do our best to make it comfortable, but the reality is you do what you can. There's 4 in the City of Nanaimo: Bowen Park, Bevan Park, Oliver Woods, and Nanaimo Aquatic Centre. If we had a large-scale disaster such as an earthquake, additional ones will open. As Ron mentioned, through the Emergency Program Act, when we have a large disaster, either natural or man-made, declarations of local state of emergency get called. And what that does is that gives the municipality some more power to kind of start gathering resources and calling for resources. And that's where you'll see more reception centers. Schools will not be reception centers until every student is accounted for in that school, because they don't want a convergence of 3,000 strangers coming in when they're trying to get 800 children reunited with their family. And I can appreciate that. I can totally appreciate that. Churches are great for community, and we're working now with the local churches to find out, how they could open their doors, because those are natural places that people will go to, both for spiritual health and also for shelter. And, a lot of people, they like to know that there's somebody else going through the same thing. Get to know your neighbors. We live in a society where, you hit the button, you go in the garage, hit the button again, it shuts. We don't know our neighbors. And these are going to be some of the people that you're going to be relying on. You're going to be relying on each other. It's going to be a community effort, and there's not going to be a case of, well, I've got this and, I'm not helping anyone else. We're all going to help each other. So those are the 4. Know the closest ones to you. And we will communicate radio, 102.3, 106.9, and 91.7. Those are our 3 channels. The radio stations actually are quite sturdy and do well in natural disasters. In addition, if you haven't signed up for the City of Nanaimo Call Alert program, do it. It's been in existence for probably, I think, 4 or 5 years, Ron? And we only have 12,000 citizens signed up. And that to me is it's sad, because it's a free service, it's confidential. We were one of the first BC municipalities to put it in effect. And what this does, if all phone systems are working, and you'll have a little brochure that we've given you, is it will provide you with the information and notify you that there is an emergency. And when we talk about emergencies, again, we don't just talk about earthquakes. We could talk about hazmat. We could talk about boil water advisory. Could be anything. It's very easy to do. You can go online, or there's a number that you can call to get on it. If you want more information on preparedness, in addition to all the resources that we brought here, there's a few websites here that I encourage you to all go and visit. There's a wealth of information out there, and it can be a bit overwhelming, but by looking at these, the fire.nanaimo.ca will take you right to the Nanaimo Fire Department webpage, and we have a bunch of information on there. PEP is the Provincial Emergency Program, and Get Prepared is the federal government. It's great information on there. So if you want to contact me, here's my email and my direct line. All of this will be posted on the city website, as well as the video, as Ron mentioned. Shaw is filming it. So feel free to contact me, and I'll hopefully answer your questions. So thank you.
Unfortunately, we did run a little bit long, so we don't have time for questions from the floor, but everybody is staying here for a while. If people do have questions, please come down, ask questions. As Karen said, she put her phone number and email up there. Mine is also available in the newspaper every 3 days a week. You can forward questions to me, and I will pass them on to to others if you want. Thank you all for coming.